My name is Alice, and at 22, I was still figuring out who I was. I lived with my mother and my stepfather, Rufus, in a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. I was a beautiful girl, or so people said. My long, dark hair fell in waves down my back, and my eyes, a deep brown, always seemed to catch attention. Men in town would stare, their gazes lingering a little too long when I walked by. I didn't like it. It made me feel like a prize in a shop window, something to be looked at but not understood. I'd never been with a man, never even kissed one. It wasn't that I didn't want love, I did, but I wanted it to be real, not just someone chasing my looks. I dreamed of a man who would see my heart, not just my face. That night, the house was quiet except for the rain. My mother was at her night shift at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse. Rufus was home, probably watching TV in the living room like he always did. He was a tall man with a rough beard and a deep voice that could make you feel small if he wanted. He'd married my mother 3 years ago, and while he wasn't cruel, there was something about him that always made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he looked at me sometimes, his eyes sharp and unreadable, like he was trying to figure me out. That I was lost in my magazine when I heard the creak of the floorboards outside my door. My heart gave a little jump. The house was old, and it made noises all the time, but this was different. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was trying not to be heard. I sat up, my fingers tightening on the magazine. The door handle turned, and before I could say anything, the door swung open. Rufus stood there, filling the doorway. His broad shoulders blocked the light from the hallway, casting a shadow across my room. He was wearing his usual flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, and his face was serious, almost grim. My stomach twisted. Rufus never came to my room. Never. If he needed to talk, he'd call me to the kitchen or the living room. This felt wrong, like he'd crossed a line he wasn't supposed to. Alice, he said, his voice low and rough. We need to talk. I pulled my knees up to my chest, suddenly feeling exposed in my old t-shirt and shorts. What's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My heart was racing now, and I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he was standing there, so still, like a storm about to break. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch felt like a gunshot in the quiet. I wanted to tell him to leave, to say this wasn't okay, but my voice was stuck in my throat. He didn't come closer, though. He just stood there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. I've been thinking, he said, his eyes fixed on me. You're not a kid anymore, Alice. You're a woman now. A beautiful one. The words hit me like cold water. I didn't like the way he said beautiful, like it was something he'd been thinking about for too long. I shifted on the bed, pulling the blanket over my legs. What do you want, Rufus? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He raised his hands, like he was trying to calm me down. Easy, girl. I ain't here to scare you. I got something important to say, and I need you to listen. I didn't want to listen. I wanted him to leave, to go back to the living room and his TV. But he was my stepfather, and as much as I didn't trust him, I didn't want to start a fight. Not with my mother gone, not with the rain trapping us in this house together. So I nodded, just once, and waited. He took a deep breath, like he was steadying himself. I got a friend, he said. His name's Daniel. Good man, runs a hardware store in town. He's been asking about you. I frowned. Asking about me? What do you mean? Rufus scratched the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable for the first time. He's seen you around, Alice. At the market, at church. He likes you. Says you're the kind of woman he's been looking for. He wants to marry you. The words didn't make sense at first. Marry me? Some man I didn't even know. I stared at Rufus, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. But his face was dead serious, and the air in the room felt heavier now, like it was pressing down on me. Marry me? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know this man. Why would he want to marry me? Rufus shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave mine. He's a good man, Alice. Got money, a steady business. He's older, sure, but he's stable. He can take care of you. You can't stay in this house forever, you know. You need a future. I felt a spark of anger ignite in my chest. A future. You think I need some stranger to give me a future? I'm not something you can just hand off to your friend. Rufus's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might yell. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower. I'm not saying you're a thing, Alice. I'm saying you're a woman who deserves a good life. Daniel can give you that. A house, kids, security. You think you're gonna find that sitting in this room, reading magazines? His words stung, mostly because part of me wondered if he was right. I didn't have a job, not a real one. I helped out at the local bakery sometimes, but it wasn't enough to build a life on. My mother worked herself to the bone to keep us afloat, and I hated that I couldn't do more. But marriage? To a man I'd never met. It felt like a trap, like Rufus was trying to push me out of the house for reasons I didn't understand. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice shaking. Why do you care if I get married? Rufus looked away for the first time, staring at the rain-streaked window. Your mother and we're struggling, Alice. Money's tight. Daniel's a friend, and he's got means. If you marry him, it helps you, and it helps us. He's willing to make things easier for us, too. There it was. The truth, or at least part of it. This wasn't just about me. It was about money, about Rufus and my mother getting something out of this. I felt sick, betrayed. My own stepfather was trying to sell me off like I was a piece of furniture. Get out, I said, my voice cold. Get out of my room. Rufus didn't move at first. He just looked at me, his eyes hard, like he was weighing his options. Then he sighed and turned for the door. Think about it, Alice, he said before he left. It's a good offer. You won't get many like it. The door closed behind him, and I sat there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The rain kept falling, louder now, like it was trying to drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to pack a bag and leave this house forever. But where would I go? I had no money, no plan. And my mother? I couldn't leave her with Rufus, not after this. The next few days were tense. Rufus didn't bring up Daniel again, but I could feel him watching me, waiting for an answer. My mother noticed something was wrong, but when I tried to tell her, the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your mother that her husband is trying to marry you off to his friend? I didn't want to break her heart, not when she already carried so much. One evening, I was at the bakery, cleaning the counters after closing. The owner, Mrs. Carter, was a kind woman with grey hair and a warm smile. She must have seen the worry on my face because she sat me down with a cup of tea and asked what was wrong. I don't know why, but I told her everything. About Rufus, about Daniel, about the way my life felt like it was slipping out of my control. Mrs. Carter listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she leaned forward and took my hand. Alice, she said, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. You're stronger than you think. If this Daniel is a good man, you'll know when you meet him. But don't let anyone push you into a life you don't choose. Her words stayed with me, like a light in the dark. I decided I needed to meet Daniel, not because I wanted to marry him, but because I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to take control. The next day, I told Rufus I'd meet his friend. His face lit up, and for a moment, I saw something like relief in his eyes. He arranged for Daniel to come to the house that weekend. I spent the days leading up to it in a haze, torn between fear and determination. What if Daniel was awful? What if he was kind? What if I said yes and regretted it forever? When the day came, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that made me feel like myself. I didn't want to look like I was trying to impress anyone. My mother was home, and she fussed over me, brushing my hair and telling me how pretty I looked. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew something was happening, and I could see the worry in her eyes. Daniel arrived in the late afternoon. He was older than I'd expected, maybe in his late 30s, with short brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was tall, with a quiet confidence that made the room feel smaller. He shook my hand, his grip firm but not aggressive, and his smile was warm, almost shy. It's nice to finally meet you, Alice, he said. His voice was deep, steady, like he wasn't in a rush to prove anything. We sat in the living room, with Rufus and my mother hovering nearby. It was awkward at first, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Daniel asked me about myself, my hobbies, my dreams, the things I loved. I told him about the bakery, about how I liked to read, about the little garden I'd started in the backyard. He listened, really listened, and for the first time in days, I felt like someone saw me as more than just a pretty face. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I spent more time together. He'd come by the house, or we'd meet at the cafe in town. He never pushed, never made me feel like I owed him anything. He told me about his life, how he'd built his hardware store from nothing, how he'd lost his parents young and learned to fend for himself. He was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny, with a dry sense of humor that made me laugh when I least expected it. But there was still Rufus. Every time Daniel left, Rufus would corner me, asking if I'd made up my mind. "He's a good man, Alice," he'd say, his voice heavy with expectation. "You won't do better." It made my skin crawl, the way he talked about it like it was a business deal. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until my mother was home and confronted them both. I told her everything: Rufus's late-night visit, his friend's proposal, the way he'd made it sound like it was for the family's sake. My mother's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw anger in her eyes, not at me, but at Rufus. "Is this true?" she asked him, her voice shaking. Rufus tried to explain, stumbling over his words, saying he was just trying to help. But my mother wasn't having it. She told him he'd crossed a line, that he had no right to meddle in my life like that. It was the first time I'd seen her stand up to him, and it made me realize how strong she was, even if she didn't always show it. In the end, I made my own choice. I agreed to marry Daniel, but not because of Rufus or his schemes. I agreed because, over time, I'd come to care for him. He wasn't perfect, but he was kind, and he saw me for who I was, not just what I looked like. We took things slow, spending months getting to know each other before we even set a date. My mother supported me, and Rufus, well, he learned to keep his distance. The day of the wedding was bright and warm, the sky clear and blue. I wore a simple white dress, my hair loose around my shoulders. As I walked down the aisle, I didn't feel like I was losing myself. I felt like I was choosing my future, one step at a time. Daniel smiled at me, his eyes full of warmth, and I knew I'd made the right choice, not for Rufus, not for my mother, but for me. Life after the wedding wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. Daniel and I built a life together, one filled with laughter, arguments, and quiet moments that meant more than words could say. I never forgot that night when Rufus walked into my room, the night that changed everything. It was a shock, a betrayal, but it was also the moment I realized I had the power to choose my own path. And I did.